Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 21 of the Bible as History with none other than your host, the Judith. I'm Judith Baker, and I'm always honored to have you join me. And this week, for this episode, we are going to dive into the faithfulness of Paul in Macedonia. Before we do that, behind me, I would like for you to take a look at what we're going to be talking about. And this dark, dungeony looking thing built into the side of a hill is in the former Philippi, which is now in Greece. I'm going to talk about that more. But this is believed to be the site where Paul and Silas were jailed. Isn't that just incredible that we actually have this place as a historical artifact in history? So let's talk about, first of all, the dynamics behind Macedonia. So, Macedonia was once the home of Alexander the Great, and most people probably know that. But in 146 BC, in the Fourth Macedonian War, it fell to the Roman Empire. And so, moving forward to the days of Paul, this area was under the rule of Rome. Key cities in the days of Paul, such as Philippi, where this is located, it looks like a tomb, doesn't it? I almost called it a tomb, and I'm sure for many people it was their tomb as they were imprisoned here in this horrible place. Anyway, Philippi was named after Alexander the Great's father, King Philip II of Macedon. Thessalonica and Berea are also formerly in Macedonia, where Paul established early Christian communities. And as we know from the New Testament, even wrote letters. He wrote Thessalonians and Philippians, and they were to the communities of Philippi and Thessalonica. So, what I really want to hone in on, I was reading in Acts chapter 16 about the time when Paul and Silas went to Macedonia. And it just really spoke to me in a different way and I noticed some things that I had never noticed before. So I'm going to dive right into them. I want to start off with the timeline. So different people have different opinions about when this happened in history. It's somewhere between 50 and 53 AD. I've even seen 60 or 61 AD. It just depends on which historian or which person's information you're looking at. So we'll just stick with the range that's simpler. In Acts chapter 16, what I'm going to talk about, all of it comes from this chapter. So I encourage you to take the time to go back and read it on your own, or you can put me on pause right now and read it, and it may mean more to you. So in verse 9, Paul it's where his time in Macedonia starts for this lesson. He had a vision in the night where a man said, Paul, we need you to come here. We need you to come to Macedonia, which I'm a person that, yeah, I believe in signs, wonders, miracles, and visions. They're all in the Bible. And yes, they're in the New Testament. If you want to argue with me, I'll just direct you back to your Bible to read them because they're there. Here's one right here from Paul. So, what blew me away when I thought about this is how did Paul know what a Macedonian looked like? So the culture of Macedonia was so prominent back then that just this man's appearance and the fact that, he says, Paul, we need you to come to Macedonia. Paul knew right away, and he knew it was a word from the Lord, and he did. He went to Macedonia, him and Silas. And so he's in Philippi, which then was in Macedonia. And the first person that he converts is Lydia, a seller of purple goods. And she becomes not only his first convert in Europe, but also the first woman that he baptized. So shortly after that, the whole time he's there and he's doing his ministry, this slave girl who had a demon in her that would fortune tell and make money for people in this community, that demon recognized who Paul was and kept, saying, this is a servant of the Lord, this is a servant of the Lord. And finally, Paul got sick of this demon talking out of turn and he rebuked it and cast it out of the girl. Well, that made the local people very angry. And they took Paul and Silas, they beat them with rods, and they threw them in this prison. So just looking at this completely changed my paradigm. In our day, prisons, you get 3 meals a day, you got a bed to lay on, you're going to college, you might be able to work in the canteen or work and actually earn a little bit of money. Not so in this day and age. So this is the kind of place, and this is the place where they threw Paul and Silas. So Matthew's commentary, and he's an older commentary. I love the older commentaries. They're just so rich to me. I want to read to you what he said. And some of this is in older English language, so I'll explain it a little bit. But he said the jailer made their confinement very severe. So having received such a charge that he might have kept them safely enough in the outer prison. So in this prison, going in it is the outer prison. Even deeper in it is this inner prison. So let me keep reading. Yet he, the jailer, thrust them, Paul and Silas, into the inner prison. He was sensible that the magistrates had a great indignation against these men. So they had really, Paul and Silas had really upset and ticked off the magistrates because he cut off their money stream through this demon. And continuing with the commentary, and were inclined to be severe with them. And therefore, he thought to ingratiate himself with them by exerting his power likewise against them to the uttermost. So, this jailer in English wanted to find favor or wanted to get brownie points with the magistrates by making sure that he threw Paul and Silas into the very deepest pit of this prison to make sure that they did not escape. So he goes on to say, when magistrates are cruel, it is no wonder that the officers under them are so too. He put them, the jailer put Paul and Silas into the inner prison, the dungeon into which their they would usually put someone who was very, very condemned. And it's dark. It's dark at noonday. Clearly, we can tell by looking at this. No sunlight's getting into this side of a hill prison environment here. It's damp and it's cold. It's dirty and it is likely in every way offensive. So Matthew also mentions that it's probably very similar to the environment that Jeremiah was let down in Jeremiah chapter 38, verse 6. So you can go back and read that as a comparison if you're interested. But Matthew goes on to say, and as if this were not enough, he made their feet fast in the stocks. Perhaps having heard of a report of the escape of the preachers of the gospel out of prison when the doors were fast barred. So in Acts 5:19 and Acts 12:9, we have testimony and we have the witness of where the Lord did get people released from prison supernaturally with angels. So this jailer, Matthew's saying that this jailer probably heard about that and said, it ain't going to happen to me. So I'm going to put him in the worst place and I'm going to lock him down. So this jailer thought that he would be wiser than the other jailers had been and therefore would eventually secure them by fastening them in the stocks. So this is Matthew's commentary and talking about where Paul and Silas went and seeing it. And I don't even know, this is so old, I don't even know if Matthew knew that this site existed. That's another whole topic you could research, right? But wow, these weren't just stocks, like we see in the movies where they, put you in the stocks, your hands and your feet. These were really evil and they were devices of torture. Adam Clark's commentary said that these were two large pieces of wood and they had holes in them like our stocks, but they were fitted in the way so that the legs could be stretched out and the holes were at different distances. So it would have produced extreme pain. And if the apostles were treated this way, They really would have had to have lied down on the bare ground in this nasty, filthy inner prison where they put the worst of the worst, to lay on their backs and in agony because I'm sure they had their legs stretched out so that they were not comfortable. And it must have really been horrific. And to think that the next thing that they did was sing praises. So here they are being tortured. They can't even see the sunlight. They probably can't even barely, they can't, I mean, it's pitch black in there. They probably can't see anything. There's probably rats crawling around, and they're in there singing praises. That is so humbling because we can go to church and we've got one ache or one pain, and we just don't really feel like singing, and yet wow, praise is a weapon, and it was surely a weapon for Paul and Silas. This is an example. So at midnight, so I have no idea how long they were there. The Bible doesn't say. I don't know if this is the same day or if they were there for a few days or what, but I know at midnight there's an earthquake. And in that earthquake, the doors open and all prisoners who are bound in fetters, chains, stocks, anything, they all fell off, and the guard believed that they had all escaped. And so this is a Roman guard, and Roman punishment is severe. And he just said, I'm just going to take my life, drew his sword. And Paul stopped him and said, don't, we're all here, we're all alive. And it wrecked the guy. It wrecked this jailer who had no thought for Paul and Silas and threw them in this environment, and then ask Paul, what must I do to be saved? What must I do to become a Christian? And Paul leads this jailer to the Lord. What a testimony. I mean, the persistence, the faithfulness, they're singing hymns, and, anybody else would not have been kind to this jailer, after what he had put them through. They'd been beaten, and, their legs every which way. It's just such, boy, when you really understand how awful this was, it's amazing to me just being able to lead this man to the Lord. Paul was so devoted to making disciples, to bringing the kingdom culture to this time period, to expanding God's kingdom. Just amazing. So the magistrates get wind of what happened, and Paul lets them know, I'm a Roman, and y'all shouldn't have locked me up because I'm a Roman citizen and I never got a proper, basically, you didn't follow the Roman laws. And now, you've locked me up. And the magistrates, embarrassed, sent their officers to tell Paul and Silas, you guys can go, just go away quietly, because they didn't want to get in trouble because they had not followed Roman law. And Paul said, no, no, this is when he said, I'm a Roman citizen and you're going to do this the right way. And you're going to acknowledge that I was treated wrong, and you're going to come and tell me I can go. And I had a different take on this too, because all the years I've read this, I just kind of hung on to the part that Paul was a Roman citizen, when what's really happening here is Paul is using every opportunity to testify to what God just did. Between the jailer getting saved, between God setting them free in this earthquake. How many earthquakes take people out of stocks and shake chains off? If anything, an earthquake probably should have collapsed this old grimy dungeon. But yeah, I mean, just wrap your brain around that. This was supernatural how God set them free. So this was an opportunity to testify and stand up to these magistrates and say, look what the Lord has done. And I believe that was Paul's true motive for saying, I'm a Roman citizen and you didn't follow the law. And yeah, you can set me free, but before you do, you're going to have to hear what happened. You're going to have to hear what the Lord did. So, such a amazing story when you really peel back the layers of the archaeology and the historical evidence, this very place where he was put that we can see with our very own eyes. It blows my mind. It just looks completely horrible. So interesting when you get into the archaeology. There is archaeological evidence that several earthquakes have happened in this area during this period of time, and it's believed that one of them might be the one that set Paul and Silas free, or at least the catalyst. We know it was the hand of God that did it, but it's interesting to find that science and what happened on the earth actually corresponds to what God did supernaturally. And there's a gentleman's blog that I found. His name is Dr. Stark, and he has a blog called Aha Bible Moments. And in his blog, he states secular records and historians write that a very significant earthquake sometime around 59 to 61 AD, the time in history when Paul and Silas were imprisoned, destroyed Laodicea, Colossus, and Hierapolis. These three cities were totaled as they lay within a natural fault between them and the Aegean Sea, the northern and western Anatolia faults, the Lycus River Valley, these coincide. And I personally agree with Dr. Stark. I have links, as always, down in the bottom, and one of them is to a research paper from a peer-reviewed source academically that talks about this event, as well as many other of the sources that I found. So today, moving forward from an archaeological standpoint, Macedonia today is not the Macedonia that it was in Paul's day. The borders have changed. Part of it is still around, and it's known as the country of North Macedonia. But much of biblical Macedonia is now in Greece, including the ancient cities of Philippi and Thessalonica. And there is an abundance of archaeological sites and findings that validate Paul's ministry. Here's the prison right here behind me, and there's way too many for me to list. I do have some links to some things. In ancient Philippi, there is a traditional site that now has a modern building on it, where it's believed that Lydia was baptized, and she was the first woman, the first European to be baptized under Paul's ministry. There's evidence of Jewish communities and archaeological excavations in what is now Thessaloniki, which would have been Thessalonica. The modern term is different. And there's even early Christian grave sites and symbols. There's Christian burials and catacomb-like sites in Macedonia that date back to the latter first and the early second centuries. So we're talking about a time frame around 50, 60 AD. So 50 to 60 years after Jesus died. Yeah, not very long. And here we have, Christianity exploding, and Paul's beginning his ministry to the Gentiles because the Jews rejected him. Just so amazing to just unpeel all of this. So my takeaways, I just have two for this one. I'm thinking about Paul and Silas, and it really wrecks me in thinking about how awful this prison was and how horrible it would have been, and yet they're in there praising the Lord and singing praises. So my first takeaway is praise the Lord no matter how much you hurt. Praise him. There's power in praise. My second one is when you've got a testimony, stand your ground as a testimony to what God does or what he has done for you, no matter who it's to. Because Paul stood his ground. He could have very easily have said, I'm going to go off and nurse my wounds. Y'all beat me. Y'all put me in these fetters. My legs hurt. I'm hungry. I'm achy. I'm okay, fine. You're going to let me go. Then I'm going to go off and I'm never coming back to this place again, which is what most of us probably sadly would have done. But no, he stood his ground because he knew it was an opportunity to use his Roman citizenship as a tool to bring to light what the Lord had done and who the Lord is. And surely this jailer's testimony, I'm sure I can just see, in my imaginative mind, like the woman at the well, him going around and testifying that, the earthquake happened and I just thought they were all gone and they were still there and they were all free and I can just hear his testimony. And so it's the word of our testimony, the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. It's in Revelation that draws people to Christ. So stand your ground when you have a testimony, no matter who it's to, because the Lord will prevail. So that's all I have for you this week. I hope you learned something about Macedonia and Paul and this horrible grave. Or right, I keep wanting to call it a grave. This horrible prison because it looks like a grave. It looks like one of the tombs that you would bury somebody in. So maybe one day I'll be able to get over to Greece and see this because it is currently in Greece, like I mentioned earlier. So. Everybody have a blessed week. Thank you for tuning in. And until our next episode, may God bless you and keep you. And remember, He loves you. I love you. And shalom. Bye bye.